So, by way of opening, I would like to perhaps share with you the questions that I have in my mind when I think about this issue, and that is the connections between these two war zones, one more historic than the other. But I guess I want to say right away that I think they have so much in common, that they're absolutely connected, because the connecting thread is power. Who has the power, who wants the power. It doesn't matter if you call it Alawite or Sunni or Shia, it's really about power. And secondly, it may be that there's less international involvement in Syria at this moment, but that's not to say that, I don't think that's enough of a factor to make it so different. My concern with making Syria unique from other places is that it makes it, if unique, then perhaps instinctively violent, that violence is in the port or something like that. So the question that I have then with respect to that is, who has the credibility to end it? So it's about credibility and legitimacy. I would like that to be the UN, but the UN isn't always credible in that regard, certainly when it comes to enforcement. So if not the UN, then what kind of international structures? Perhaps a consortium of countries with the UN. In this part of the world, the Arab and Muslim world, those kinds of structures have been effective. So what kind of international structure would be effective in doing this? And I think finally I would like us to think about the historic forces that make this happen. And because I am a historian, so history is so very important. But perhaps there also we find commonalities. Why are there these three distinct groups in Syria? How did that come about? Could it be the French? Or perhaps not? Where are the French now? Are they saying we're so sorry? No. So maybe that's too much to hope for. And really finally, what I learned from hearing the students speak is it just confirmed what I've always thought. So in my classes, history of the modern Middle East classes, we quite often go to various parts of the Arab and Muslim world. And it is transformative, just like I heard you students speak. It transforms you, and that's wonderful, and we applaud that transformation. But more than that, it is a way to change the world. It is a way to get engagement and ownership over conflict. So I think the solution is that we kind of shut a little bit of the university down and go traveling.
Hi, Terry Hallmark, for those of you who don't know me. I have to begin with this statement. That the views I expressed today here are my own. Look, they made me say this or I can't go back to work. And so they're not the views of my employer, IHS, or any of its subsidiary business units, which are Cambridge Energy Research Associates, James, Global Insider, and any of the others. I'm going to talk about foreign policy. At least that's my slot on the panel. And, you know, when you think about foreign policy, the goals of American foreign policy, and apologies to some of you who have heard this before, is, you know, they're to protect us and our nation's territory from foreign threats and to promote our interest abroad. That's pretty much it. That's the government's job when it comes to the execution of our foreign policy. And that policy can be judged as good policy or bad policy, depending on whether or not it achieves those ends. But it's not always easy to achieve those ends. That's the difficulty. First of all, you have to know what exactly you're trying to accomplish. That's not always clear. Second, more often than not, the issues are difficult and very complex. Not to mention dealing with matters of life and death. And in terms of what to do, there's usually nothing but a bunch of really lousy options to pick from. And finally, things are made still more complicated by the fact that our thinking on foreign policy, American foreign policy, is informed by two contradictory impulses. On the one hand, we have George Washington warning us in his farewell address that our foreign policy ought to be sharply focused and narrow in scope. And then on the other hand, we have Woodrow Wilson telling us at the beginning of the last century that America is exceptional and that we have an obligation to spread democracy and our other ideals in order that the world can become a better place. So we tend to be, at best, confused and occasionally schizophrenic. As far as Syria goes, and the question that intervened there, killing of the innocents, it's in the middle of the Civil War. I guess there are three questions that we might address in terms of American foreign policy. First of all, can we intervene? Well, sure. Second, should we intervene? Probably, but that may be open to debate more than some people think. And then third, if we can and probably should intervene, will we? That's the important and most interesting question. But I will close with this. No matter what we end up doing, I come down on the side of Winston Churchill, who famously once said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after all of your options have been exhausted. So, I'll
Thank you very much. I'm Cyrus Contractor in the Department of Political Science, and I guess a lot of these questions they posed and all the things that they said, I've already, well, that's what I was going to say, much of it. But perhaps to add on to that, to your question, I would ask, it kind of just jumped into my head, is first, one question I think is interesting is why are Alawis in power, right, in Syria? The history is interesting of how Assad's father came to power, and also to look at Syria in a broader context. Now, I guess I should get this out there in the beginning as well. The pictures that we saw earlier, the stories that we hear, I took a class on Bosnia, and many of you were still very, 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 very young. Like 1994, I believe, when I was an undergrad. And 94, 96, something like that. And just looking at these pictures, rehash a lot of those memories from that class. It's very, very emotional images, stories, just the history itself. And I'm just going to get this out of the way from the beginning, is that my approach to a lot of this stuff I try to remove, especially with this hat on as a professor and a political scientist, I try to remove my emotion from much of it. At home, my wife will hear all of my emotions. But here, the point here I'm trying to say is that please don't take my perhaps dryness to some of this as meaning that I don't care. Of course, all the events in Syria and the events previously in Bosnia are heart-wrenching. To hear about a military or a dictator using his air force against civilian populations is, you can't justify it. You cannot defend it. But nevertheless, it is what is happening. And I think that an important question to also consider is, why is it happening? Why hasn't anybody stepped in? And what role, as he was asking, will the United States play, if any? I guess to probably get my point across here is that I don't imagine anything anytime soon. And there are many reasons for that. Geopolitical, both, and so there's a few different levels here, right? On the international level, you have the Chinese and the Russians that are playing hardball. Why are they playing hardball? Why are they not going on? Why do they see it happening, but why might they not be willing to play or allow for something to happen? On the regional level, I mean, unfortunately, you have many countries pulling and pushing, and the people that are bearing the brunt of it are the people of Syria. But nevertheless, perhaps from a realist perspective, again, not to sound callous, but it doesn't really mean much, does it? Unfortunately. And then, of course, on the local level, Shias, or I should say Alawis versus Sunnis, and also the Kurdish question. Why are these other states so involved, the particular states that are? When we say that there is no international intervention, I think to a large extent there has been international intervention from the very beginning, before it actually even started, just albeit in a different form than actually NATO on the ground or UN on the ground doing something to stop it. I'll stop right there.
I'm Irene Gunther, and I am really lucky to teach a class on 20th century genocides for the Honors College, and we always open it up to the university sort of at large. and I'm always rewarded with wonderful students. This semester in particular, when we found out this conference was going to take place, we flip-flopped the syllabus a little bit so we could be covering what happened in Srebrenica and the war in the former Yugoslavia at the same time that the conference was scheduled. So I was not told to have a prepared statement until about an hour before this occurred, so I do not have a prepared statement. But I can tell you this, that we grapple the entire semester with comparing and contrasting genocides. Is that dismissive, of this case to this case? And my argument always is that if we study genocide really, really deeply, there are so many similarities that should throw up red flags both to the national and the international community to stop an act of genocide before it occurs. That would be the first time in history that would occur, as far as I know. Acts of genocide go on constantly, and the international community usually does not respond until years after the fact. So whether it's Rwanda 10 years later that Bill Clinton goes and says he's sorry, or whether it's Srebrenica and years later they come to commemorate and apologize, whether it's Cambodia, which is finally getting its trial 30 years after the Cambodian genocide occurred. It seems as though most of those acts of violence are written out of history books and sort of met with indifference by you and I, as well as by the international community. So I was delighted when I was asked to come to the panel because my course is framed based on the convention that, whether we like it or not, was agreed upon by the United Nations. And I think we can learn a great deal by talking about Bosnia and what occurred in Srebrenica and other parts of the former Yugoslavia to alert us to what is going on in Syria so that, in fact, we might respond appropriately and quickly enough.